So this is the third week out of 6 of Brain Games. And if you missed the last 2 weeks, I encourage you to listen to those. But today, we're going to talk about this topic or the subject of depression. And here's kind of a working description from the American Psychiatric Association. Depression causes feelings of sadness and or loss of interest in activities once enjoyed. It can lead to a variety of emotional and physical problems and can decrease a person's ability to function at work and at home. Statistically, here's where we are at as a country when it comes to depression. The first is this, is 1 out of every 9 people this year will experience mild symptoms of depression. Okay, and so as we talk about depression this morning, we're talking about kind of a spectrum that there's certainly diagnosed, severe, clinical, that sort of side of things, but there's also depression in terms of just difficult days and down moments and those types of things. And as we talk about depression, we're really talking about a spectrum of things, and this says 1 out of every 9 will have mild symptoms of depression. The next statistic is this: 1 out of every 5 people will experience major depression in their lifetime. So 1 out of 5 of us will have major depression. The next statistic: 1 out of 9 people regularly take some kind of antidepressant medication. So there's a lot in our world, in our country, and just our culture that has us in this state of depression, whether it's mild or severe. And here's one more statistic, and this links what we talked about last week with what we're going to talk about this morning, about people and walking with people. And it's this, is 60% of people who have symptoms of depression don't seek any help. And that's in part because of the stigma of depression. And so what I want to do this morning is I want to talk about this and normalize the conversation and not sweep it under the rug. Because depression comes from a really wide variety of places. There are, obviously there's physiological things going on in our brains and that type of thing. There's family history that contributes to it. There's circumstances in our lives that contribute it. There's circumstances that we see in other people's lives, in the world around us, and all of those contribute to this issue of depression in our lives. And I want to start, before I jump too far in, I want to share something that I shared the very first week, and I want to share it again and repeat it today, and especially given the weight of this topic, is I am not an expert on depression. I am not a trained counselor. I am not a therapist, and I have never personally been diagnosed with depression, and yet I do have bouts of kind of on the mild side where there are seasons of life that are just hard, and there are times and sometimes just days it's like I just don't feel like moving forward. And I realize that's not the same. And again, we're talking about a spectrum, but I want you to know I'm not an expert in this. But about the last 10 minutes of the message, I'm going to bring up my friend Rick Hardison, who is very much an expert in this, and ask him some questions on behalf of all of us. And so what we're going to do this morning is we're going to look at Elijah, and his story is found in 1 Kings chapter 19. He was a prophet of Israel, and what we're going to do is we're going to look at his story, and we're going to see 5 different things to do or not to do. So he did some things that were right, he did some things that were wrong, but we're going to look at these 5 different things about the actions that we take. And when we're talking about depression, whether we're just at the tip of it or in the throes of it or spiraling down, there are actions that we take towards getting out of this depression. And there's things that God does and there's things that people around us do, but we're going to talk about that. But I also wanted to just share, we're going to talk about kind of do, but there's also this reality. And a verse just hit me this morning as I was praying about what God would want me to say and kind of putting the finishing touches on this. And there's a verse from the book of Psalms that says, God is close to the brokenhearted. It's Psalm 34:18. God is close to the brokenhearted. And if today you are dealing with depression, whether it be mild or severe or wherever it is on that spectrum, I want you to know that God is close to the brokenhearted. He is near to you in your pain, in your despair, in your disappointment, in your difficulty. As we go through this, again, I'm going to give you 5 points. And it's one of those things where, and by the way, this message, as we get into it, if it sounds familiar, I am giving a message that I gave a number of years ago. I've actually kind of given similar messages twice. So if it sounds familiar, like, I think somebody's given this, it was me. I'm plagiarizing off of myself from a number of years ago. So footnote me, okay? But as I was looking at the 5 points at the beginning of this week and like, okay, this is where I'm going, I just did a curiosity search. And so I did an AI question. I asked ChatGPT, I said, what are the 5 things that someone who has depression should do? And it was interesting. Of those 5, 3 of them were basically identical to what I've said in this. And the other 2 were slightly different. One was very different, but another one is like, we have the God concept, and ChatGPT has not yet become a Christian, so they didn't give me that answer. So anyway, that's a part of it as well. So I want to start a chapter before in 1 Kings chapter 18 and give you a little bit of the backstory. So Elijah is a prophet of God, a man of incredible faith. And so the nation of Israel is turning from God, and there's a king whose name is Ahab. And so King Ahab is worshiping Baal. He's turning away from God, from Yahweh. And so it comes to this big showdown between the prophets of Baal and Elijah. And it's like this, basically this big showdown where we say, okay, we're going to figure out who is really God. Is it the God of the Baals and that kind of thing? And that's who Ahab, who is supposed to be the Israelite king, is following. Or is it really the Lord? And so the showdown is they put these bulls there. They've sacrificed bulls. And then whoever's God can light the bull on fire as a sacrifice. He is the one who is truly God. That is God. And so Ahab and the prophets of Baal go first. And as they do this, nothing happens. And then nothing happens. And then nothing happens. And so they begin to cut themselves and cry out louder and louder. And then Elijah begins to trash talk them, which I just love. He's like, well, maybe your God's going to the bathroom and he's not hearing you. I mean, I just love that, right? So he's trash talking. And then it's time for God to do his thing. And so the first thing that Elijah does after the sacrifice is he takes gallons and gallons of water and dumps them on the sacrifice. And at the time, there's a drought going on, and God's kind of showing a bigger picture of his control. And then God lights this burnt offering sacrifice. And so the prophets of Baal kind of turn tail and run, and it shows that God is God. And Elijah's short prayer is this: answer me, Lord, that this people may know that you are the Lord. And when he prays that prayer, it lights up, and God lights this thing on fire. And as you hear that story, it's like, that's amazing. And you would think, after hearing that, or after experiencing that as Elijah, that he would never have faith problems again, that he would never doubt, that he would never have bad days, that he would never doubt his faith or anything. He would always be all there because he saw this incredible thing. But that's not the reality of what happens. So Ahab then leaves. He's defeated at Mount Carmel, and he goes to his wife, whose name is Jezebel. And Jezebel is a mean, wicked woman. And so what Jezebel does is she sends Elijah a text message, right? And I just happened to get a screenshot of the text message that Jezebel sends to Elijah. And it says this: so may the gods do to me and more also, if I do not make your life as the life of one of them by this time tomorrow. She says, Elijah, I am going to kill you by this time tomorrow. She gives him a death threat. Now, you probably realize this, but she didn't actually send a text message, right? You realize that. But she did send a message to somebody else. But I put that up there in a text message format for this reason. I think that sometimes we get those messages, whether it be a text message, a Facebook message, or a phone call, or an email, and it just has an absolute deflating cause on us. It just deflates us. I mean, think about the times that your cell phone has buzzed and you've picked it up and you've looked at it and you're like, oh, right, out loud. I mean, I think we all do that. Or you open up your email and you read the subject line, the first sentence, and you're like, and it sends us into this place of kind of despair and disappointment, and discouragement, or frustration for us. And that's the message that Elijah got. And so this is what he does. Then he was afraid, and he arose and ran for his life and came to Beersheba, which belongs to Judah, and left his servant there. But he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness and came and sat down under a broom tree. And he asked that he might die, saying, "Is it enough now, O Lord? Take my life, for I am no better than my fathers." So he goes from this mountaintop experience, like really, really close to God, down into the pit. So much so he says, just take my life. I don't even want to live any longer. It says that he went and he laid down next to a broom tree. When I was in Israel about 18 months ago, we got to go into the desert, and I took a picture of this broom tree. Okay, now this broom tree is not the same one, but you look at that broom tree, and it's not a tree; it's a bush, and it's all scraggly and pointed, and it's sharp, like briars on it, and all that kind of thing, and it grows out of the rocks. Right? And if you think about it, he went and laid under the broom tree. I mean, is there anything about lying under that thing that looks comfortable? No. I mean, that looks like the most uncomfortable place that you could ever go. And it's just interesting to me, again, as the more I look at this story, the more I see how Elijah really was depressed in his actions and what he did. And you look at that, and one of the things that happens to us when things go bad is instead of trying to get out or to do the right things, we do things that just make us more miserable. That we intentionally sort of like negative thoughts to ourselves and do stuff. It's like, I'm terrible, it's getting worse, what's the point? And I'm just going to be miserable. Well, you could do this, which you like, I don't want to, right? And that's the same thing that Elijah does. He just goes and lies under this broom tree. Now, before he gets to this broom tree, I want to go back and read part of verse 3 and 4. It says, he left his servant and his servant there. So he left his servant there, and he himself went into the wilderness. And so he travels this great distance from Mount Carmel to Beersheba, and then his servant is with him, and then he leaves his servant. He says, I want to go and be by myself. Here's the first thing as far as when we talk about depression in our lives is I will not go it alone. I will not go it alone. And that's what he does. He says, I just want to be by myself. He doesn't keep his servant with him. He leaves the people that he knows. You know, we talked about this last week a lot. So if you missed last week, I talked about it a bunch. So I don't want to go into it more here other than to say, hey, last week was talking about the value of having people around us. But here's the thing, is if you don't believe me, if you don't believe what happens here, if you don't believe what we talked about in Proverbs last week, in Galatians last week, then at least listen to this fella here. All right, listen to what Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson says. He says this. He says, it took me a long time to realize it, but the key is to not be afraid to open up. Especially us dudes have a tendency to keep it in. You are not alone. That is so true. We need people around us when we're going through difficult times. So then God sends an angel to Elijah. And this is what happens to Elijah and how they interact. It says this, and he lay down, he slept under a broom tree. And behold, an angel touched him and said to him, arise and eat. And he looked, and behold, there was at his head a cake baked on hot stones and a jar of water. And he ate and drank and lay down again. And the angel of the Lord came again a second time and touched him and said, arise and eat, for the journey is too great for you. And he arose and ate and drank and went in the strength of that food 40 days and 40 nights to Horeb, the mount of God. What the angel is doing here is he's establishing a pattern for Elijah to follow. He says, wake up, now eat, now drink, now sleep. Wake up again. Now eat. Now sleep. Now drink. Now go and exercise. Go on this journey. He's doing this. That's the way he's ministering. Here's the second point for us, is I will take care of my body. There is something that experts say, we see it here. Again, the more I look at this, the more I see how much this is true in terms of what we've learned in the 3,000 years since then about depression. But you talk to people who are experts in depression, and when you get in those situations, one of the best things you can do for yourself is to get on a healthy schedule, to eat, to drink, to exercise, to get out, not just to lie in bed, or not just to play video games, or not just to doom scroll on Facebook, or whatever you might be likely to do. Get up, get out, and do healthy things. Then it says this, verse 9, there he came to a cave and lodged in it. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said, what are you doing here, Elijah? He said, I have been very jealous for the Lord, the God of hosts. For the people of Israel have forsaken your covenant, thrown down your altars, and killed your prophets with the sword. And I, even I only, am left, and they seek my life and take it away. He says, I'm the only one left. He's saying these things, and the problem is Elijah believes what he is saying. He says, Israel has forsaken the covenant. Well, you know what? That's true, but that's old news. Yes, they had forsaken the covenant, but did you hear what they said after God did his thing on Mount Carmel? This is what they said in 1 Kings 18:39. And when all the people saw it, they fell on their faces and said, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. That doesn't sound like a group of people who are forsaking their covenant. But yet Elijah thinks the people are forsaking their covenant. Then he also says, they have killed your prophets with the sword. It's like, Elijah, how short is your memory? Don't you remember that just a short time ago, God triumphed over the prophets of Baal? And he says, I am the only one left. It's not true. As we look at the story, there are other prophets of God, other followers of the Lord who renewed their commitment to the Lord at Mount Carmel, saying, the Lord is God, the Lord is God. But you see, the problem for Elijah is he's believing the lies that are in his head. Takes us to our third action. I will not believe the lies in my head. Not believing the lies in our head is much easier said than done, because when they are the lies in our head, we think that they're true. So how do we discover if we think that they're true but they're actually lies? How do we get around that? How do we figure that out? And there's two kind of practical sides I'll give to you. The first is this, is put the things, when you're feeling that way, put the things in your brain to a test. And I kind of call this the always never test. If we are saying things like, I always do this, or I never do this, or about ourselves or the world, that's a good sign that we're believing a lie. I always do the same dumb thing. I will never change. Well, that goes through our brains, but it's just not true. It's not an always or a never thing. Maybe you do some dumb things, but not everything is dumb. Maybe it'll take a while to change, but it's not that you'll never change. Or no one ever appreciates me. Well, it's just not true. It's a lie. When we have that always or never in our inner dialogue, that's a sign to remind us that that's a lie in our head. Here's the second, and this goes back to point number one, is we need people around us who are going to speak truth to us, who are going to point out the lies in our lives. And I can't help but think and kind of rewind and replay the story in a different way. And imagine, so Elijah went alone. He left his servant and he went alone. Imagine if he had gone with his servant and he had said these same things to his servant, like, Elijah, how you feeling about things? Well, you know what? Israel, everybody's forsaken the covenant, and I'm all alone, and nobody follows Jesus, and nobody follows God, and saying those things. And then his servant would be right there and say, no, that's not true. Don't you remember? That was true a while back. They'd broken the covenant, but now they're following God again. They're saying he is the Lord, he is God, and he would be that reminder of truth to him. Here's what the angel says next. And he said, go out and stand on the mount before the Lord. And behold, the Lord passed by, and a great and strong wind tore the mountains and broke it in pieces, and the rocks before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, the sound of a low whisper. I love this story. A huge wind comes up, but God's not in that. And then there's this earthquake, but that's not how God is speaking. And then there's a fire, and that's not how God is speaking. God is not speaking through the circumstances that Elijah is looking at. As God is speaking to him, it says, in a low whisper. And part of what it means for us to follow God, to not allow ourselves to spiral down, is to listen to the whisper of God. And that's the fourth point. I will listen to the truth that God whispers. That we want to listen to that. And if you're looking for a place to listen, I think the Psalms are one of the best places to listen to the whisper of God. Because the Psalms are very emotionally driven. And the things that they express will be the things that are on your heart. They will put words to how you are feeling. And it says this in verse 15. It says, and the Lord said to him, go, return to your way to the wilderness of Damascus. And when you arrive, you shall anoint Hazael to be king over Syria. And Jehu, the son of Nimshi, you shall anoint to be king over Israel. And Elisha, the son of Shaphat of Abel-Amalah, you shall appoint to be prophet in your place. God gives Elijah these assignments. Go anoint Hazael. Go anoint Jehu. Go anoint Elisha. Those, he says, go and do these things. Takes us to our final point is this, is I will look beyond myself. When we experience depression, whether it be mild to severe, our first inclination is to look inward. We look at my pain and my difficulty and my hardship and my darkness and my circumstances and my anxiety and we look inward. And there's absolutely a place for self-care. But one of the things that we see here is that God says, look and go serve somebody else. Live out your purpose. And part of us getting healthy in that way is not being all about ourselves, but is looking for ways to serve and care and show acts of kindness towards others. I did some research on this week, and there's a journal, a psychology journal, and what they did a study, and they measured the effects of kindness towards the effects of kindness on those who had moderate to severe depression. Okay, and so what they did is they told the people who were mild or severe depressed, they gave them assignments to do as far as kindness and caring, how many times per day, how many times per week, and then they compare that to a control group that they didn't say anything to. So they did a comparison study, and they found that there were three things that those who did acts of kindness, those who looked beyond themselves, how it changed. The first is the symptoms of depression went down as compared to the group that didn't do those things, that didn't do the acts of kindness. The second is they had increased positive social interactions. And the third is that they experienced greater life satisfaction than the group that didn't do the acts of kindness. And so again, as we talk about this, when you get to feel that way, when you begin to spiral down, look and say, how can I look outside of myself? How can I serve and love somebody else and not just kind of get self-focused on all the darkness that's going on in me? That's part of how God brings us and rescues us from this. So I've kept this sermon a little bit shorter on purpose because I want to bring up my friend Rick Hardison. So if I could get Rick to come on up here, and we're going to just have a little conversation about a few things. All right. All right. All 48 of you, give Rick a warm welcome. All right. If you're watching online, hit the like button or the heart button or something.
Okay.
Okay. You ready?
You are doing great with this, by the way.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
My first question was did I screw anything up? Do you need to correct anything?
No, in fact, you've made me change some of what I'm going to say and maybe make it briefer.
Okay. All right. Those who don't have four-wheel drive appreciate that.
Yeah. What you don't know is Matt asked me ahead of time, talk about why should I consult a professional, okay? And that's kind of a subset of I can't go it alone, and maybe beyond all the other people, I bring in a professional.
Yep.
On this, and some thoughts about that. Where do we? You normalized. You wanted to normalize depression.
Yeah.
Whatever we do here in this brief time, I hope it normalizes talking to a professional. Okay.
Yep. So how does a person know? They're like, well, I'm kind of sad. I don't like doing the things I used to do. I'm feeling a bit hopeless. How do I know when is it time to pick up the phone or look on the internet and try and find somebody who's a professional opposed to just talking to my peers?
A beginning point is I've tried everything I can think of, including everything Matt's told me in his sermons. I've shared this with my small group. I've prayed. I've done, you've done a really good job of touching on the different kind of things that different people struggle with, because this is a very specific kind of thing. And that becomes part of the problem. People get general information. Okay, your sermons covered a lot of territory. Maybe I read this great self-help book, and I don't feel helped because I don't think this author quite got me. Maybe a professional could get me and help me specifically.
Yeah.
And that would include a doctor too,
okay,
who might say, I'm going to give you a prescription. Let's try this. Okay?
Yeah.
That isn't quite, we're just beginning to think about, and there'll be some people who 6 months from now will say, I tried everything. I went back and listened to all Matt's sermons another time. I got a book. Still not there.
Yeah. And so, Rick, so you're mostly retired from counseling, but when people would come to you and kind of with that initial visit, I assume that you would sort of are there different directions that you would take people? So some you would say, hey, I think you need to take a step this way with medication, or see me regularly, or how does that work in terms of that initial, I'm scared to death, I'm talking to this person, I made an appointment, I walk in.
Well, the first thing is to let them know, you're scared, you're doing it right, I've done this before, we'll be okay. And then I listen a lot. And if I have a thought, recommend this, I tuck it away. And I listen. See, I learned years ago, I'm supposed to be listening to them and God at the same time. Now, I'm recommending go see a Christian counselor, or, let me take that back, at least one who will honor your faith.
Okay.
May not have to be a Christian counselor, but they'll let you bring your faith in there with you. And I'll say a little bit more about that maybe toward the end of the comment I want to make.
Okay.
So I listen a lot. I listen to, and see, that's the advantage of going to a professional. They've got a lot of tricks in their bag. I mean, if somebody came to me now and told me about some anxiety, I'd pull a couple things out right away, okay? And some general things. But I would listen and try to find out, who is this person? What exactly? And see, that's the advantage of going to a professional than talking to your friends. Your friends may not, they may give you too much slack. Mm-hmm. They may not give you enough slack. Yeah. They may have great advice on, well, if I was you, I would this. Well, they're not you. Yeah. And I'm trying to not be you. It's your life.
Let me throw a little bit of a curveball at you. But one of the things we talked about last week, and you hit on it here, is we're also in that place where somebody comes to us and we're bearing their burdens, their share with us. Like, what are some things? So a friend comes to me and I'm trying to figure out, like, should my counsel be go see a professional? Should my counsel be, like they say some things like I'm self-harm, or I'm thinking about hurting myself or killing myself? What are some things that you would say that's something to listen for, to send them to, encourage them to go to a counselor?
Okay, well, the extremes there, if you really believe somebody is revealing to you for the first time and nobody else, I think I'm going to do it. I've thought about it. I got an idea. I know when. I really think I'm going to kill myself. Then take them to the emergency room right away. Mm-hmm. Okay. Although there's such a range there of thinking about dying, thinking about. Some of you are old enough to remember It's a Wonderful Life, George Bailey. I wish I'd never been born. What would life be like if I was dead? I think a lot of us go there, but we're not about to go, well, I'm gonna experiment with it and find out, because I'm not gonna be here to find out if I try that. So the range there, and that's something to go to if you haven't thoughts about that, but you could honestly say, yeah, but I'm not gonna do it. Well, okay, let's talk. How come? What is it that you feel like that's the answer about? Because I'm thinking we could find some other answers. Mm-hmm. Killing yourself is the permanent solution for a temporary problem. I bet let's put some other things on the list first. Let's try some other things first.
Yeah. And there's suicide prevention hotlines and things like that, that you would, if somebody's going that direction, you would definitely say, get immediately help.
I wouldn't leave them alone.
Yeah.
Because, if you're there, you can stop them. Yeah. Or if they're in a hospital, they'll get stopped.
Yeah.
But if it is more of I've thought about it. Think about it with a professional, maybe.
Okay, good. So we want to wrap up. Any closing thoughts that you have, words of encouragement, wisdom, advice?
Yeah. You probably can guess where I've got to finish, okay? One of the joys of being a counselor through the years is praying with people. And you talk today about listen to the truth that God whispers. With so many people, I would find out a lie that they've gathered, maybe one event, maybe a series of things. Our childhood has the potential to warp all of us. Let's admit it, okay? We were all raised by imperfect human beings. So I would pray with people, and we would prepare in a way to hear God's whisper, to claim the power of Jesus, the name of Jesus Christ, against all distractions, all other voices. God, what is your truth for this person? He most often went one of two directions in I couldn't say hundreds, dozens of examples of this. He'd say something like, I'm here. They might ask a question, and he doesn't even answer the question. He just says, I'm here. I understand. Most often, he would just say, I love you. The embracing fully that the God of the universe loves you. For a lot of people, that's enough. That's the answer. But for everybody, it's a part of the answer.
Yeah.
You have no idea how much God loves you.
Awesome. Thanks, Rick. Yeah. Hey, thanks for being here. Thank you for watching online. Let me close this out with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for this time together, Lord. Thanks for the opportunity to gather, to hear your word, to worship together, to learn from the scriptures. And God, I do pray for those who are battling depression in mild forms and severe forms. God, I pray that you would be close to the brokenhearted, that you would impress on them how much you do love them, Father. And God, may we store this message and bring it out at those times in a month or a couple of years when we're struggling with these things and remember your truths. I ask all this in Jesus' name. Amen.